A courtroom was packed with reporters. A powerful CEO lost control and struck his pregnant wife right in front of the judge. But the moment his hand connected, everything changed. Because that judge wasn't just anyone. She's the victim's mother, and she's about to turn his empire into ashes. What follows is a story of pride, downfall, and the unstoppable force of truth. You won't believe how far justice can reach until we dive in. Let us know what time you're listening and where you're tuning in from. And drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The courtroom was so still that even the soft rustle of papers sounded loud. Light filtered through tall windows, catching the dust in the air like slow snow. Cameras stood in the back row, their red lights blinking, ready to broadcast what everyone thought would be an ordinary hearing about a divorce. But nothing about this morning was ordinary. Ethan Grayson, the polished CEO of Grayson Holdings, sat at the plaintiff's table. His navy suit was sharp, his tie perfectly centered. Everything about him screamed control. Beside him, his attorney whispered something, but Ethan barely listened. His eyes were fixed on the woman across the room. Clara sat quietly at the defense table. Her long, dark hair was pulled back in a loose braid, her face pale but steady. One hand rested on her pregnant belly, as if guarding it. The other clutched a folded handkerchief. She avoided Ethan's gaze. The bruising under her sleeve, faint but visible, told a story that no words had yet dared to speak. Reporters whispered. The judge hadn't entered yet, but anticipation filled the air. This case had drawn attention not just because of the wealth involved, but because of the rumors that surrounded it. Stories of control, threats, and sudden disappearances from company records had made the front page for weeks. Now everyone waited for confirmation of what they suspected. That behind the polished glass towers of Grayson Holdings, something ugly was rotting. A door opened behind the bench. All rise. Every person in the courtroom stood. The sound of chairs scraping echoed through the marble chamber. Clara's breath caught. The judge walked in with calm precision, her robe flowing like a wave of black silk. Her silver hair was tied neatly at the nape of her neck. To anyone watching, she was simply Judge Margaret Hill, known across the state for her fairness and her fearlessness. But to Clara, she was something more, something deeper. The mother who had raised her to believe that truth always finds its way to light. Ethan didn't notice the tension. He adjusted his cufflinks, smirking slightly. "Let's make this quick," he muttered to his lawyer. The hearing began with formalities. Voices rose and fell. Lawyers exchanged documents, but under the surface, something volatile was brewing. Clara's attorney questioned the company's financial transfers, pointing to funds moved from joint accounts into Ethan's private holdings. Ethan's composure began to crack. "That's company business," he snapped. "It has nothing to do with her." Judge Hill's voice was calm but cold. "Mr. Grayson, you'll have your turn to respond. Let counsel finish." Her tone carried authority, and for a second Ethan hesitated, but ego was stronger than reason. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he said. "My wife doesn't understand the world I live in. She never did. She's emotional, irrational." A ripple of whispers spread across the courtroom. Cameras clicked. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, trying to stay calm. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry. Not today. Her lawyer asked, "Mrs. Grayson, could you describe what happened the night of August 14? Clara's lips trembled slightly. He got angry. I asked about the missing funds. He said I was ungrateful. I tried to leave, but he grabbed my arm." "He lies," Ethan barked, his voice cutting through her words. "She's lying." The judge's gavel hit the block once, sharp and final. "Mr. Grayson, control yourself." But he didn't. His breathing quickened, his knuckles whitened against the table. "You're trying to ruin me," he said, glaring at Clara. "You've been doing this from the start, playing the victim, making up stories." "Hello?" Clara tried to respond, but before she could, Ethan stood up abruptly. The chair screeched backward. Gasps filled the room. "Sit down, Mr. Grayson," Judge Hill ordered. He ignored her. "You think you can take my company, my reputation, my life?" His voice rose with every word. "You think you can walk away and make me look like a monster?" He stepped closer to Clara's table. Security began to move, but not fast enough. In one motion, swift, uncontrolled, and burning with rage, Ethan's hand struck across Clara's face. The sound was deafening. A single slap, sharp as thunder, echoed off the walls. Papers fluttered to the floor. Clara fell sideways, clutching her cheek. Her lawyer shouted, "Hey, are you insane?" Reporters gasped, cameras flashed, and the courtroom dissolved into chaos. People shouted over one another. Some stood frozen, others scrambled to pull Ethan back. "Don't touch me," he yelled, trying to shake free. "She deserves it. She's been lying to everyone." Clara's hand trembled as she pushed herself upright. The red mark on her cheek deepened. Tears welled but didn't fall. Her breathing was uneven, but her eyes, those calm, steady eyes, found her mother's. Judge Hill rose slowly from her chair. The movement alone silenced the room. The authority in her stance, the cold fury in her expression made even the bailiffs stop mid-step. "Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice low but powerful. "You just committed an act of violence in my courtroom." Ethan froze. Only now did he seem to recognize her, truly see her face beneath the robe. "You," he whispered, realization dawning. "You're her mother?" Margaret Hill's expression didn't change. "Yes, and you just assaulted my daughter in front of the court, in front of witnesses, and under the eye of the law." The entire room held its breath. The blinking red light on one of the security cameras continued to flash, capturing everything. The fear, the outrage, the moment a man's empire began to crumble with a single slap. Clara sat silently, one hand still pressed to her cheek. Her mother's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Bailiff," Judge Hill said, never breaking eye contact with Ethan. "Detain Mr. Grayson for contempt of court and assault." The sound of footsteps echoed, handcuffs clicked, and as Ethan was led away, still muttering disbelief, Judge Hill turned back to her daughter. Her face softened just enough for Clara to see the mother behind the robe. The courtroom, once filled with noise, now held a sacred kind of silence, a silence that marked the end of fear and the beginning of truth. Then, softly, Judge Hill spoke again. Court is in recess, but no one moved. No one spoke. Every eye was on the woman who had just stood up, not only as a judge, but as a mother, as justice itself, taking human form. The sound of the gavel still echoed long after Judge Hill had left the bench. The courtroom sat frozen, as if time itself refused to move forward. A single tissue fell from a reporter's notebook and fluttered to the floor, the only thing daring to move in the heavy air. Clara sat motionless. Her cheek still burned where Ethan's hand had struck her. The mark was already darkening, a cruel reminder of what had just happened. She touched it gently, half in disbelief, half in shame. Around her, people whispered, their words hissing like snakes. "Did you see that?" someone muttered. "He actually hit her." In front of the judge, another voice whispered back, "That's her mother, isn't it? The judge is her mother." The words rippled across the rows. Phones glowed as fingers moved frantically, typing what they had just witnessed. Within minutes, the story was already alive beyond the courtroom walls. Screens lit up across the city with headlines and live updates. But inside the courtroom, Clara barely noticed. Her pulse thudded in her ears faster than her breath could keep up. She could still smell Ethan's cologne, sharp and heavy in the air. Her hand shook as she tried to reach for a glass of water, but her attorney, a kind-faced man named Richard, caught it first. "Don't move," he said quietly. "Just breathe." "Oh." Clara looked at him, her eyes clouded with tears. She refused to let fall. "He did it," she whispered in front of everyone. "I know," Richard replied, his tone steady. "And that's what will save you now. There's no denying it anymore. The cameras caught everything." At the mention of cameras, she turned her head toward the back of the room. Two security officers were speaking to a technician who was already pulling footage from the main feed. A red light blinked on the recorder. It had never stopped blinking. Every second, every cruel gesture, every word was preserved. In the far corner, Ethan's lawyer argued frantically with a deputy. "You can't arrest him. He's the plaintiff in a civil hearing. He's under tremendous emotional stress." "You can't." The deputy raised a hand to silence him. He struck a woman in court in front of a judge. "We can." The lawyer's face went pale. He turned to look at Ethan, who sat cuffed in the corner, eyes wild and unfocused. For once there was no arrogance in him, no confidence, only disbelief. He muttered under his breath, repeating the same words over and over. "She ruined me. She ruined me." Clara's gaze flickered toward him, but didn't linger. She had spent too many years studying that face, trying to find kindness in it. Now all she saw was a stranger who had once convinced her that love meant control, that silence meant loyalty. Her mother returned a few minutes later, her robe removed, now wearing a simple gray blouse beneath. Without the black fabric of authority, she looked smaller somehow, but stronger too, more human. The bailiff straightened immediately. "Judge Hill," he said softly. "We've cleared the press from the hallway. Do you want a private room for your daughter?" She nodded. "Yes. Please escort her there." "No." Clara wanted to protest to say she was fine, but when she tried to stand, her knees gave out slightly. The bailiff caught her arm before she fell. The humiliation cut deep, sharper than the pain on her cheek. She hated feeling weak. "I can walk," she said through clenched teeth. "I know you can," her mother replied quietly. "But you don't have to right now." Those words broke something inside her, not in a painful way, but like a knot finally coming undone. For years, she had carried the weight of proving she was fine, proving she could survive anything. Now, for the first time, someone told her she didn't have to. They led her through a narrow hallway into a private chamber. The heavy door closed behind them, muffling the noise outside. Inside the small room, sunlight poured through a single high window. The air smelled faintly of polish and paper. Her mother gestured toward a chair. "Sit," she said softly. Clara obeyed. Her mother knelt in front of her, gently brushing the hair from her face. The same hands that had once tied her shoelaces and held her after nightmares now trembled slightly. "Clara," she said, her voice cracking for the first time that day. "Why didn't you tell me?" Clara stared at the floor. Her fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve. "Because I thought I could fix it. Because he said it would ruin his reputation if anyone knew." Margaret took a slow breath, steadying herself. "He almost ruined you and our grandchild." Clara's eyes filled again. "I didn't want to be your failure." Those words hit harder than the slap. Margaret's composure broke. She sat beside her daughter, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You are not a failure," she said fiercely. You are the reason I do what I do. You are the reason I fight for the truth." For a long moment, neither spoke. The quiet hum of the air vent was the only sound between them. Outside, reporters were shouting questions, camera shutters clicking in rapid bursts. Inside, there was only the faint sound of a mother's heartbeat steadying her daughter's. When they finally parted, Margaret wiped her tears quickly and returned to her professional tone. "The police will file assault charges. Richard will stay with you for the initial statement. I'll recuse myself from the case, of course. But this time, Clara, you let the law protect you." Clara nodded. "I will." "No." Her voice was stronger now, though her body still trembled. She could feel the child moving inside her, a tiny, reassuring flutter, life continuing even after chaos. A knock came at the door. It was Richard again, holding a clipboard. "The press is waiting outside," he said carefully. "We can go through the back exit if you want privacy, or we can make a statement. It's your choice." Clara looked up at her mother, then back at Richard. Her mind raced. For years, Ethan had controlled every narrative. Every rumor that threatened him was buried under money or manipulation. But now, with cameras rolling, the truth had a voice louder than his. "I'll make a statement," she said quietly. "But not today." Her mother gave a faint smile. "Good. When you're ready, the truth will already be waiting for you." Outside, the noise grew louder. Flashing lights from the press flickered through the frosted glass like lightning. Clara took one more deep breath. She wasn't ready to face the world yet, but for the first time, she believed she could. Richard opened the door, clearing a path through the corridor. Margaret followed close behind, her presence both protective and unyielding. As they stepped into the bright light of the courthouse lobby, every camera turned their way. For years, Clara had walked beside Ethan as the silent wife of a powerful man. Now she walked alone, the mark on her face visible for all to see. But it was not a symbol of shame anymore. It was evidence. It was truth. And truth, she realized, was the only thing stronger than fear. The next morning, the city awoke to headlines that stretched across every screen and paper. CEO assaults pregnant wife in court. Judge's daughter struck during hearing. The footage from the courtroom had gone viral overnight. Every network played it on loop, frame by frame, slowing down the moment Ethan Grayson's hand struck his wife. Public outrage was instant. Talk shows debated it. Hashtags trended. Reporters camped outside the courthouse and in front of the Grayson Holdings headquarters. For years, Ethan had been a symbol of corporate success. Now he had become a living scandal. Inside his penthouse, Ethan stared at the muted television. The video replayed without sound, but he didn't need the audio to hear the gasp of the crowd. The sharp smack that had echoed through the courtroom, the moment that had shattered his image. His reflection in the black screen behind the broadcast looked older, thinner, desperate. His lawyer, Dean Miller, stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear. "I understand," Dean said firmly. "But Mr. Grayson has not been charged yet. It's all a misunderstanding, a family dispute blown out of proportion." He paused, listening. "Yes, I'll tell him. I'll call you back." He hung up and turned toward Ethan. That was the board. "They're holding an emergency meeting at noon. They want you to make a public apology." Ethan scoffed. "Apology for what? For defending myself?" Dean pinched the bridge of his nose. "For hitting your pregnant wife in front of a judge who happens to be her mother. You need to understand how bad this looks. Low." Ethan rose from the couch, pacing the marble floor. "They don't know the full story. Clara provoked me. She's been trying to destroy me for months. She's unstable, emotional. She's been feeding lies to the press." Dean sighed. "You need to stop talking like that. The world saw what happened. There's no spinning that video." Ethan turned sharply. You think you know her, but you don't. She's manipulative. She always plays the victim. She knew the cameras were on her. She wanted this. Oh. Dean kept silent, letting the man spiral. He had seen powerful men crumble before. But this was different. Ethan wasn't just angry. He was terrified. Terrified of losing control, of losing the empire he had built on charm and intimidation. Ethan stopped pacing and looked out the window at the city skyline. You don't understand. I made her. When we met, she was nobody. A graduate student with no name, no influence. I gave her everything. The house, the lifestyle, the company's image, and this is how she repays me. Dean hesitated. Ethan, she's the daughter of Judge Hill. She wasn't exactly nobody. Ethan turned, his jaw tightening. She never told me that when we met. I didn't know who her mother was until years later. She hid it. She played me. Dean looked at him carefully. Are you sure about that? Ethan frowned. The question lingered longer than he wanted it to. The truth was he couldn't remember when he'd learned about Clara's mother. Maybe she had told him. Maybe he hadn't cared back then. He believed nothing, and no one could touch him. The doorbell rang. A housekeeper answered it, returning moments later with 2 uniformed officers. Mr. Grayson, one officer said politely. We're here to deliver a restraining order filed on behalf of Mrs. Clara Grayson. You are to have no contact with her in person or by phone. Effective immediately, Ethan laughed in disbelief. A restraining order against her husband? Yes, sir, the officer replied. Signed by Judge Margaret Hill this morning. The laughter died in his throat. His hand twitched, but he forced it down. Fine. Let her hide behind her mother's robe. This isn't over. After the officers left, Dean spoke quietly. It's over, Ethan, unless you start acting like you understand the damage. Ethan ignored him, grabbing his phone. I'll fix this myself. He opened a live video stream. The screen flashed with thousands of viewers instantly joining. His PR team had warned him not to do this, but he couldn't resist. He needed to control the story. He adjusted his tie, forced a calm expression, and began. Good morning, everyone. I know you've seen the video, and I want to set the record straight. What happened in court was unfortunate, but it has been taken out of context. My wife has been struggling emotionally during her pregnancy, and I reacted poorly in the moment. I love my family. I would never intentionally hurt Clara or our unborn child. Dean watched in horror. Ethan continued, digging his own grave with every word. She's been under stress, Ethan said, his voice growing steadier. She's been manipulated by people around her, including her mother. They've turned her against me for reasons I can't discuss publicly. Within seconds, the comment section exploded, blaming a pregnant woman. He's gaslighting her live. He's done. No. The stream ended after 5 minutes, but the damage was already irreversible. The clips were reposted everywhere. Ethan's words became new evidence of arrogance and denial. Dean rubbed his forehead. That was the worst thing you could have done. Ethan slammed the phone on the table. You don't get it. The public forgets. They always forget. I just need to remind them who I am. Dean's voice turned cold. They already know who you are. That's the problem, Joe. Hours later, Ethan arrived at the board meeting. The long mahogany table gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The directors, once eager to please him, now looked away when he entered. His seat at the head of the table remained empty. The chairman cleared his throat. Mr. Grayson, we've reviewed the footage and your statement. The company cannot survive this kind of publicity. Effective immediately, you are suspended from all executive duties pending further investigation. No. Ethan's mouth went dry. You can't do this to me. This is my company. It was, the chairman said calmly, until your actions endangered it. The meeting ended without applause, Without argument, without sympathy, Ethan walked out of the room to a hallway full of cameras. The reporters shouted his name, their voices blending into one merciless roar. "Mr. Grayson, did you really hit your wife? Is it true Judge Hill filed the order herself? Are you stepping down permanently?" He said nothing. For once, he had no words to twist, no charm to deploy. The microphones followed him until the elevator doors closed. As the lift descended, the mirrored walls reflected his hollow eyes. He tried to convince himself it wasn't his fault, that Clara had trapped him, provoked him. But even his reflection didn't believe the lie anymore. Far above him, on the 12th floor of the courthouse, Clara sat in a waiting room with her mother and lawyer, giving her statement to the authorities. Her voice was steady now. For every word Ethan used to justify his violence, she was giving the truth, shape, and weight. And this time, it was his story that was falling apart. By the second afternoon after the hearing, the world was still reeling. Every major news outlet replayed the same footage of Ethan's slap. The frame had become iconic, frozen in time. A powerful man's hand raised, a pregnant woman flinching, and the look of horror that swept the courtroom. But inside the courthouse that afternoon, a different storm was forming. The district attorney's office was preparing to file official charges against Ethan Grayson for assault and contempt of court. The officers who had detained him during the hearing had documented everything. Even the bailiffs had given statements. There was no escaping the evidence. Clara sat quietly in a conference room surrounded by her attorney, Richard, and a few investigators. Her mother, Judge Margaret Hill, could not be part of the legal process due to the family conflict of interest, but she was waiting outside in the corridor. The law required separation, but the bond of blood refused to obey that rule. One of the investigators closed his folder. "Mrs. Grayson, thank you. We'll handle the rest from here. You've done the right thing." Clara gave a polite nod. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't feel victorious, just empty. When the meeting ended, she stepped into the hallway. The marble floors reflected the afternoon light, making the air shimmer. Her mother stood near the window, speaking quietly to a bailiff. The moment their eyes met, Clara felt the strength in her legs falter again. Margaret's tone softened. "You did well. You spoke clearly and you stayed calm." L. Clara nodded. "It doesn't feel like enough." Margaret placed a hand on her shoulder. "Justice doesn't come in one moment. It builds piece by piece. And right now, the truth is finally louder than his lies." Before Clara could reply, the sound of shouting echoed from the far end of the hall. Reporters had found the side entrance, and security rushed to block them. Cameras flashed, voices blurred together. "Grayson, do you plan to press additional charges? Is it true your mother signed the restraining order herself? Do you regret marrying Ethan Grayson?" Richard quickly stepped between her and the crowd. "No questions, please. Mrs. Grayson is not making public statements today." But amid the chaos, another sound cut through the firm voice of an officer. "Step back, please. This area is restricted." Clara turned her head and froze. A tall man in a dark blue uniform walked toward them. His presence alone commanded silence. The crowd instinctively moved aside. His posture was straight, his expressions steady. The gold badge on his chest caught the light. Captain James Whitman, Metropolitan Police. He introduced himself to the court officers. "I'm here to speak with Judge Hill regarding the evidence." Margaret stepped forward, her professional composure returning instantly. "Captain Whitman, thank you for coming." The captain nodded respectfully. "Ma'am." His gaze then shifted toward Clara. His voice softened slightly. "Mrs. Grayson, I've reviewed the footage from the courtroom. It's clear, unedited, time-stamped. We're treating it as an open and shut case." Clara swallowed hard. "So, there's no chance he can manipulate it?" None, Whitman said firmly. And there's more. The security footage shows that he had been warned twice to control his temper before the assault. That strengthens the case for intent. Margaret exhaled slowly. That's significant. Whitman nodded again. It is, but there's something else you should know. His legal team is already trying to suppress parts of the footage, claiming a violation of privacy. Margaret's lips tightened. Typical. Fortunately, Whitman continued, the footage was backed up automatically to the courthouse server. There's no way to erase it now. For the first time in 2 days, Clara felt a small wave of relief. The image of Ethan's hand rising in anger had haunted her every time she closed her eyes. Knowing that same image would become his undoing felt like justice beginning to breathe. Reporters outside continued to shout questions through the hallway doors. Whitman turned to the Biffs. Let's clear this corridor. No unauthorized press inside this section. Yes, sir. One of the guards responded immediately. Within minutes, the hallway emptied. The silence that followed was almost startling. Margaret motioned toward a bench near the window. Sit for a moment, both of you. We have decisions to make. Clara hesitated. What kind of decisions? Her mother looked at her, calm but deliberate. Whether you want to settle quietly or pursue full charges in public court? Clara's eyes widened. You mean another trial? Margaret nodded. Yes, a criminal trial. This won't just end with his suspension or public shame. It could end with prison. Clara's thoughts swirled. She pictured the headlines, the interviews, the endless questions. But she also remembered the sound of the slap, the sting on her skin, and the fear in her child's tiny heartbeat that day. I don't want revenge, she said softly. I just want it to stop. I want him to understand what he did. Whitman's voice was steady. Then let the law do that for you. We'll make sure every second of that footage stands in front of the jury. No. As they spoke, the doors at the end of the hall burst open again. Ethan Grayson himself appeared, flanked by his lawyer and 2 security guards. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. The confident CEO was gone. What stood there was a man unraveling under the weight of his own pride. When he saw Clara, he stopped walking. The guards tried to usher him forward, but he ignored them. Clara, he said, his voice low, desperate. Please, you don't understand what's happening. They're turning you against me. You're making a mistake. Clara stood slowly. Richard moved between them, but she placed a hand on his arm. It's fine, she said quietly. Her voice carried across the hall, soft but clear. The only mistake I made was believing you'd ever change. Ethan's expression flickered between anger and disbelief. You can't do this to me. You know who I am? Before she could answer, Captain Whitman stepped forward, his tone calm but sharp. Yes, Mr. Grayson, we all know who you are, and we also know what you did. For a long second, no one spoke. The weight of Whitman's words filled the hallway. Ethan's lawyer tugged his sleeve, whispering something about leaving before making things worse. Ethan finally turned, his movement stiff, his voice trembling with rage. This isn't over, he muttered. Whitman's eyes narrowed. It already is. As Ethan disappeared down the corridor, Clara sat back down. Her pulse slowed. Her mother reached for her hand. That man, Margaret said quietly, glancing toward Captain Whitman, just became our greatest ally. Clara looked at him. The captain gave a slight nod. For the first time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, she was no longer alone in this fight. Outside, the sound of sirens filled the street. But inside the echo of authority, steady, unshaken, and just, had already begun to restore order. The following morning dawned gray and cold. Rain streaked down the tall courthouse windows, turning the city into a blur of glass and reflection. Inside one of the conference rooms, Clara sat across from her lawyer, Richard, reviewing documents for the upcoming hearing. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. Every hour brought new headlines, new speculation, and new threats. Richard slid a folder toward her. These are statements from witnesses, 3 reporters, 2 court clerks, and 1 bife. They all confirmed what happened. Clara flipped through the pages slowly. The words were factual, clinical, but each sentence carried the echo of humiliation she had lived through. "Do you think he'll show up today?" she asked quietly. "He has to," Richard replied. "His bail agreement requires him to appear in person." A sharp knock on the door made them both look up. Captain Whitman entered, Rain still clinging to his uniform. He gave a small nod. "He's here. Arrived 10 minutes ago with his lawyer. The media is surrounding the entrance, so security's tight." Clara's stomach tightened. "He'll try to make a scene." Whitman's eyes met hers. "Then we'll make sure it's the last one he ever makes." In another part of the courthouse, Ethan Grayson was already pacing the hallway outside the courtroom. His lawyer, Dean Miller, followed him anxiously. Ethan's expensive suit was pressed, his hair immaculate, but there was something frantic beneath the surface. He kept glancing toward the cameras lining the corridor. "They're still filming me," Ethan muttered. "I should say something. Clarify what happened." Dean stepped in front of him. "Absolutely not. No more statements. Every word you say becomes evidence." Ethan's jaw tensed. "They're painting me as a monster. Do you know what that's doing to my company? To my reputation?" "The company suspended you," Dean reminded him carefully. "You don't have a reputation left to protect." Ethan's hand twitched, clenching at his side. "That woman and her mother planned this. They're destroying me deliberately. They think they can humiliate me in front of the entire world, but I'll fix this. I'll take back control." Dean looked uneasy. "Don't say that here. Cameras are everywhere." Ethan smirked bitterly. "Good. Let them watch." When the courtroom doors opened, he strode in like a man walking onto a stage. The journalists in the gallery whispered as he took his seat. Across the room, Clara sat beside her attorney, calm but distant. Her face bore no makeup, only the faint, fading mark of his hand. She didn't flinch when he entered. Judge Morrison presided over this session, a stern man with steel-gray hair. "This is a preliminary hearing regarding the charge of assault and contempt of court," he announced. "Mr. Grayson, do you understand the accusations against you?" Ethan leaned toward the microphone. "Yes, Your Honor. I understand that I'm being falsely accused by a woman who has manipulated everyone around her." Gasps rippled through the spectators. Dean closed his eyes in frustration. "Mr. Grayson," he whispered, "please stop talking." Judge Morrison's tone turned icy. "Mr. Grayson, this court has seen the video evidence. There is no question of whether the incident occurred. The only matter before us is how you intend to respond." Ethan forced a thin smile. "I intend to defend myself." Margaret Hill sat silently in the back of the courtroom. Though she wasn't presiding, her presence carried weight. Every time Ethan glanced her way, a flicker of unease passed through him. He could face lawyers and reporters easily, but not her, not the woman whose gaze stripped every excuse bare. Richard stood and presented the evidence, the uncut footage, the witness statements, the medical report confirming mild trauma to Clara's jaw. "Your Honor," he said clearly, "we request a restraining order be extended for the safety of Mrs. Grayson and her unborn child." Ethan's voice broke in, sharp and defensive. "She doesn't need protection. She's fine. She's exaggerating for sympathy." Whitman, who stood near the door, stepped forward. "Permission to address the court, Your Honor." Judge Morrison nodded. Whitman's tone was calm but commanding. "Our department reviewed all surveillance angles." Mr. Grayson ignored 2 verbal warnings from court officers before striking his wife. He then resisted restraint. We also recovered deleted text messages from his phone threatening Mrs. Grayson days prior to the incident. The room went completely silent. Dean looked horrified. "Captain, those messages were private communications, not when they involve criminal intent," Whitman interrupted. Ethan's eyes flashed. "This is an ambush. You're all working together. You, her, that woman pretending to be my wife." The judge slammed the gavel. "Enough. One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt again." Ethan sat down, breathing hard. His chest rose and fell like a cornered animal. The courtroom that had once been his arena was now his cage. When the judge called for recess, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. As soon as the cameras stopped recording, Ethan leaned toward Clara across the aisle. His voice was low, almost a growl. "You think you've won because your mother and your pet cop are protecting you? You have no idea what I can still do." Richard moved instantly, blocking him. "Back away, Mr. Grayson." Whitman appeared beside them, calm but firm. "Sir, you're violating the restraining order by approaching her." "Step away now," Ethan sneered. "You going to arrest me again, Captain?" Whitman met his gaze evenly. "If I need to." Security escorted Ethan from the room. The doors closed behind him, muffling his furious words. Clara let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her mother came to her side and took her hand. "He's losing control," Margaret said softly. "That's what happens when truth takes away power." Clara looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly. "He's not afraid of losing power. He's afraid of being seen without it." Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered once more. Ethan emerged, surrounded by bodyguards, his expression dark. Flashbulbs erupted, shouting, voices overlapping. "Mr. Grayson, is it true your wife's testimony may send you to prison? Do you have any comment for Judge Hill?" He didn't answer, but in the brief second before he entered his car, the cameras caught it. A flash of fury in his eyes, the kind that promised the fight wasn't over. Back inside, Captain Whitman stood by the window, watching the convoy leave. "He's not going quietly," he murmured. Margaret joined him. "Then well be louder." In that moment, the 3 of them, mother, daughter, and ally, understood that this wasn't just about one act of violence. It was about dismantling years of control, power, and manipulation brick by brick. Outside, the storm that had begun as rain turned into thunder. The city trembled, but inside the courthouse, something unshakable was finally beginning to stand firm. By the end of the week, Ethan Grayson's world had turned into a collapsing stage under the weight of cameras and judgment. His name, once attached to luxury, influence, and power, now lived in the headlines of disgrace. Every channel replayed his court outburst, his denial, his arrogance. Even business analysts who once praised him now called for his resignation. But Ethan refused to disappear quietly. His pride wouldn't let him. He believed that if he could control the narrative, he could still win. So he made a plan, a reckless, desperate plan, to face the public himself. He called a press conference at the downtown Grayson Holdings building. Dean, his lawyer, begged him to cancel. "You're walking into a storm," Dean warned. "Every question they'll ask will destroy what's left of your image." Ethan smoothed his tie, his reflection staring back at him from the polished elevator doors. "I've built my career handling storms," he said. "This is just another one." When he stepped into the bright lobby, the chaos hit like a wave. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, voices shouted his name. He stood behind a podium, a company banner hanging proudly behind him. The logo gleamed under the harsh light as if mocking him. "Thank you for coming," he began, forcing a calm smile. "I want to address recent events regarding my private life," the first reporter shouted before he could continue. "Private life? Mr. Grayson? You assaulted your wife in a courtroom. That's public record." He ignored the comment, gripping the podium tighter. "The media has exaggerated the incident. I made a mistake." "Yes, but I was under emotional distress. My wife has been influenced by others who wish to see me fail." Cameras clicked rapidly. Another reporter's voice pierced through the murmurs. "Are you blaming Judge Hill, your wife's mother, for your behavior?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm saying that personal matters should remain private." In the back of the room, a large screen suddenly lit up. Someone had connected a live feed. Confusion rippled through the audience. The sound came before the image. A woman's voice, steady and calm. It was Clara. "Private," she said from the video. "He calls it private because that's how he's always hidden the truth." The crowd turned. The footage played from the courthouse security camera showing the exact moment Ethan raised his hand and struck her. The audio echoed through the lobby. The gasp, the gavel, his angry voice. Ethan froze. Dean rushed forward, whispering urgently. "Someone hacked the feed. We have to cut it." But it was too late. The room erupted. Reporters shouted over one another. The clip looped again, slower this time. Every frame a dagger to his pride. On the second-floor balcony, Captain Whitman stood beside Margaret Hill, watching the chaos below. He had been the one to authorize the release of the footage, ensuring the truth reached every screen in the building. Margaret said nothing. Her face was calm, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Down below, Ethan tried to regain control. "Turn that off!" he shouted at his staff. His voice cracked. "This is illegal, you can't!" But security didn't move. The company's communications director whispered something to a technician who hesitated, then nodded. The screen stayed on. The truth stayed on. The reporters were relentless. "Grayson, do you deny this is you? Do you still claim emotional distress? Will you resign from your position?" Ethan's control shattered. "This is a smear campaign," he yelled. "You think I'm the villain, but you don't know what she's done." His microphone cut out mid-sentence. Dean had reached forward, disconnecting it. "Stop talking," he hissed. "You're digging your own grave." But Ethan pushed him away. "No one silences me in my own building." He stepped from the podium, fury rising, his polished image cracked entirely. He looked less like a CEO and more like a desperate man grasping for air. Margaret turned to Whitman. "You should intervene before this gets worse." Whitman nodded, signaling to the unformed officers stationed near the entrance. They began moving toward the stage. Ethan noticed and laughed bitterly. "Of course, send your lapdogs. Arrest me again for defending myself. That's what you people do." The officers didn't respond. They stood firm, surrounding him, but not touching him. The flashing lights from the cameras painted the lobby in blue and white bursts. Margaret descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. When she reached the floor, the crowd fell into uneasy silence. Even Ethan paused when he saw her. "Judge Hill," one reporter called, "is it true you were in court when this happened?" Margaret's voice was measured. "Yes, I was there. I saw it with my own eyes." The murmur spread again. Ethan clenched his fists. "You shouldn't even be here," he said, his voice shaking. "This is my company." "Oh no," Margaret replied, her eyes steady on him. "This was your company, and now it's a crime scene of your own making." The silence that followed was heavier than any words. The audience, the staff, even the reporters sensed the shift. Power had changed hands. The man who once commanded rooms with his voice now stood surrounded, exposed. A reporter raised his phone. "Judge Hill, do you believe justice will be served?" Margaret nodded slowly. "Justice is already being served. Sometimes the truth itself is the verdict." Ethan's breath came fast and uneven. He looked around as if the walls were closing in. "You can't destroy me," he muttered. "You think you've won, but this will fade. People forget." Margaret turned away. "Then let time decide who is remembered and who is forgotten." Whitman stepped forward. "Mr. Grayson, the court has issued a warrant for additional questioning regarding the messages and financial manipulation tied to your wife's account. You'll come with us now." Ethan's final attempt at composure vanished. He shouted as the officers led him toward the doors. "I built everything. You can't take it from me." The cameras followed him until the doors shut. Outside, the crowd cheered as the police cars pulled away. Inside, Clara entered quietly through a side door. Her mother looked at her with both pride and sadness. The footage was still looping on the screen behind them. Clara watched it once more, not with pain, but with calm acceptance. Margaret placed a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't have to do anything, Clara." The truth spoke for itself. Clara nodded. "It finally did." The noise of the crowd outside faded. The giant screen went black, and in that sudden silence, justice felt less like punishment and more like release. The morning after Ethan's public breakdown, the courthouse felt different. The tension that once clung to its marble walls had turned into quiet purpose. Officers moved briskly. Lawyers spoke in low, firm tones, and in the center of it all, Clara sat in a hospital room 2 blocks away, her hand resting protectively over her belly. The fluorescent lights hummed softly. The rhythmic beeping of a fetal monitor filled the room, steady and calm. Each pulse of sound was like a small reassurance that life, fragile yet determined, continued despite the chaos surrounding her. Dr. Alvarez adjusted the monitor straps and smiled gently. "The baby's heartbeat is strong. You're doing well, Clara." Clara exhaled a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "I was afraid," she admitted after everything that happened in court. "I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the stress if it hurt her." Dr. Alvarez shook her head. "Your blood pressure is stabilizing and the baby is fine. What you need now is rest and a sense of safety." Safety? The word felt foreign. For months, her life had revolved around fear. Fear of angering Ethan, fear of his control, fear of what would happen if she left. But for the first time, she felt the faint outline of what safety might mean. Her mother entered quietly, carrying a folder of documents. Margaret Hill looked more like a lawyer than a judge that morning. Her robe had been replaced by a gray suit, and her face was serious, calm, and precise. "Good news," she said, sitting beside her daughter's bed. "The hospital agreed to place an additional security detail outside your room. You won't have to worry about him trying to come near you." Clara's eyes widened. He wouldn't dare. Not after what happened. Margaret's tone was steady. "He has dared before. We don't give him the chance again." She opened the folder and laid out several papers. "These are the formal police reports and medical documentation. We're filing them together. The district attorney has also requested a no-contact order that extends beyond the courthouse. It will cover every form of communication: calls, letters, messages, social media. If he so much as sends someone to deliver flowers, it becomes a violation." Clara nodded slowly. "That sounds final." Margaret gave a faint smile. "It's not final. It's protection. The final part comes when justice is served." At that moment, Captain Whitman entered the room. His presence was calm, almost grounding. He removed his hat and nodded respectfully. Mrs. Grayson, Judge Hill. Captain Margaret greeted him. I assume you're here with updates. Yes, ma'am. He placed a folder on the bedside table. We've completed the documentation for the assault charge. The district attorney's office is moving quickly. They've also attached the digital evidence from the court feed and the press conference. Clara glanced at him. Does that mean he's still in custody for now? Whitman said he's being transferred to a holding facility pending arraignment. His attorney is negotiating bail, but given the restraining order and the public nature of his offense, it's unlikely he'll be released without conditions. Margaret folded her hands. What kind of conditions? House arrest, he replied. Electronic monitoring, no public appearances, and no contact with you. Clara's shoulders dropped slightly in relief. It's strange, she said softly. For years, I used to think about what it would feel like if he wasn't around me all the time. I thought it would feel lonely, but now it feels like breathing again. Whitman nodded. That's how freedom usually starts. Quiet and a little unfamiliar. Dr. Alvarez returned briefly to check the monitor again. The steady rhythm of the baby's heartbeat continued to echo through the room. Whitman glanced at the screen. That sound, he said softly, should remind everyone why this case matters. Margaret smiled faintly. You have a poetic side, Captain. He shrugged lightly. I just call it perspective. The room fell into silence for a few moments. Outside the window, light rain began to fall, pattering gently against the glass. Clara watched it slide down in tiny rivers, the gray skies softening the sharp edges of the city skyline. She turned back to her mother. Do you think people will believe the truth now? They already do, Margaret answered. The footage, the witnesses, the medical reports, they've all spoken louder than his excuses ever could. The court of public opinion may not decide guilt, but it makes people see who he really is. Clara looked down at her hands. And who am I now? I spent years as Mrs. Ethan Grayson. That's all anyone saw. Margaret reached out, covering her daughter's hands with her own. You're Clara Hill, my daughter, a mother-to-be, a survivor, and you will build something new out of this, something that belongs to you. Before Clara could respond, Whitman's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. Excuse me. He stepped out into the hallway, lowering his voice. When he returned, his expression was tight. That was the department. His legal team just filed a motion claiming the restraining order violates his constitutional rights. Margaret sighed. Of course they did. Desperation disguised as defense. Clara's heartbeat quickened. Does that mean he can get near me again? Whitman shook his head quickly. No, the motion doesn't pause the order. It's just noise. The law stands until a judge overturns it, and that won't happen. Margaret gave a knowing look. He's trying to intimidate us from the inside now. It's his last weapon. Whitman nodded. Exactly. That's why I wanted to confirm personally that we're increasing patrol presence around your home and workplace. The security footage from the hospital will also feed directly to our system. Nothing will happen without my office knowing about it. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to smile, a small, tired smile, but real. Thank you, Captain. He nodded respectfully. You don't owe me thanks, ma'am. You just owe yourself peace. After he left, Margaret stayed behind. The rain outside had stopped, leaving streaks on the window like silver threads. She stood by the bed, looking at her daughter's face, the same face she had seen bruised, scared, and silent only days before. Now it held something new, a quiet resolve. You should rest, Margaret said softly. Tomorrow we'll meet with the district attorney and finalize the filings. Then this moves into the hands of the law completely. Clara nodded. Tomorrow, she repeated, almost like a promise. As her mother left the room, Clara turned her head toward the monitor again. The soft thump of her baby's heartbeat filled the space, steady and sure. It wasn't just a medical sound anymore. It was a rhythm of life, of persistence, of everything that had survived the storm. She closed her eyes, letting that sound wrap around her like a shield. For the first time in months, she slept without fear. The following week unfolded like a slow storm. Each day seemed calm on the surface, but underneath, the investigation was moving with precision and purpose. What had begun as one act of violence was now unraveling into something much deeper, a pattern of control, manipulation, and deceit that stretched back years. Clara returned to her mother's home temporarily. The air there smelled of jasmine and old books, a quiet contrast to the chaos of the past months. For the first time in a long while, she could sit by the window and breathe without looking over her shoulder. But peace came mixed with unease. She knew Ethan's power had never rested solely in his hands. It had always been in his secrets. One afternoon, Captain Whitman arrived carrying a large evidence box. His uniform was slightly damp from the rain outside. Margaret met him at the door, her expression composed but expectant. "You found something," she said. Whitman nodded. "A lot of somethings. May I come in?" They settled in the study, the walls lined with leather-bound legal volumes and framed commendations from Margaret's years on the bench. Whitman opened the box carefully, revealing folders, hard drives, and several sealed envelopes. "We executed a search warrant at Grayson Holdings," he explained. "At first we were looking for communications related to the assault and the attempted cover-up, but then we found this." "No." He handed Margaret a small folder labeled Internal Security Footage, Confidential. The pages inside contained still images, Clara's image taken without her knowledge from inside their home. Each picture was time-stamped, showing her alone in the kitchen reading, sitting on the patio. Clara froze when she saw them. "He recorded me." Whitman's tone was quiet but firm. "For at least 8 months, we recovered several hidden cameras from your residence, all connected to a private server registered under one of his shell companies." Margaret's hand tightened around the papers. "That explains why he always seemed to know where she was, what she was doing." Clara's voice trembled. "He said it was intuition that he could read me." Whitman shook his head. "He was watching you. And that's not all. We also found encrypted files detailing financial transfers. He was siphoning company money into private accounts under your name. It looks like he was planning to frame you for embezzlement if things went wrong." The room went silent. Rain tapped softly against the window, the sound almost mocking in its calm. Clara's heartbeat roared in her ears. Every puzzle piece she'd tried to ignore was now falling into place. "I always wondered why his lawyers looked at me strangely during meetings," she said quietly. "He made me sign documents without explaining them. He said they were just for taxes." "No." Margaret closed the folder and set it aside. "This is systematic abuse," she said. "Emotional, psychological, financial. It's not just an outburst, it's a pattern." Whitman nodded. "That's exactly how the prosecutor sees it. They're preparing to upgrade the charges, not just assault, but coercive control and fraud." Clara leaned back in her chair, exhaustion washing over her. "He never hit me before that day in court," she murmured. "But now I see he didn't need to. He had already built a cage I couldn't see." Her mother reached out and took her hand. "The difference now is that the cage is gone, and the keys are in our hands." Whitman continued, pulling out another envelope. "We also have statements from his former assistant and 2 employees. One of them claims Ethan ordered them to delete footage of previous arguments between the 2 of you." The assistant said she quit after witnessing him throw a glass at the wall near you during a company event last year. Clara's eyes widened. There was a camera in that room. The security team said the feed malfunctioned. Whitman gave a small nod. It didn't malfunction. He ordered it wiped, but fragments of the footage were stored on a backup drive. We recovered those too. Margaret's voice was steady. This changes everything. It does, Whitman agreed. With this evidence, the prosecution can show a clear history of intimidation. That slap in the courtroom wasn't spontaneous rage. It was the inevitable result of years of unchecked abuse. Clara's breathing grew shallow. She felt both vindicated and hollow. Every secret now exposed meant reliving what she had tried to forget. But as painful as it was, she knew the truth had to be seen in full. "What happens next?" she asked. "The evidence will be presented to the grand jury," Whitman said. "They'll determine whether to proceed with the full indictment. Given what we have, it's almost certain." Margaret stood and began pacing slowly. "And what about the company? The shareholders will want answers." "They're already acting," Whitman replied. "The board has called for his permanent removal. They've frozen his assets pending investigation. His name has become poison to investors." For a long moment, none of them spoke. The weight of justice moved slowly, but it was moving. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "I want to testify," she said. Her mother turned sharply. "Clara, that's not necessary yet." "The evidence." "I know," Clara interrupted, her voice steady. "But I want them to hear it from me. Not just the lawyers, not just the footage. I want them to know who he really was when no one else was looking." Whitman gave her a small nod of respect. "If you're ready, the district attorney will be grateful for your testimony. It makes the case stronger." Margaret hesitated, then smiled faintly. "That's my daughter," she said softly. As the captain gathered his files, the light outside began to change. The rain had stopped, and sunlight broke through the clouds, spreading across the city in pale streaks. Clara watched it reflect off the wet pavement, bright and clean, as if the world itself were beginning to wash away the grime of deceit. When Whitman left, Margaret lingered beside the evidence box. She touched one of the folders, her fingers tracing the edge of the paper. "He thought power meant control," she said. "But power without truth always ends like this." Clara looked at her mother, her voice quiet but sure. "Then maybe the truth is the only real power there ever was." In the silence that followed, the house seemed to breathe again. The walls, once heavy with fear, now felt light. The hidden cameras were gone. The files had been turned over. And for the first time, the story belonged entirely to them. By the end of the month, the city had turned its full attention to the case of Ethan Grayson. What had started as a domestic scandal had grown into a corporate and criminal catastrophe. News trucks lined the street outside the courthouse. Every major network carried updates. The man who once ruled boardrooms and headlines now stood on the edge of ruin. The hearing that morning was closed to the public, but leaks had already reached every newsroom. Clara, now in her third trimester, sat quietly in the witness room with her mother beside her. She wore a simple navy dress and a soft gray cardigan. There was no jewelry, no makeup. She didn't need to look powerful. The truth gave her all the power she needed. Margaret squeezed her hand gently. "This is the last major hearing before trial. After today, it's in the jury's hands." Clara nodded, steadying her breath. "I'm ready." Across the hall, Ethan waited in a holding room, pacing like a caged animal. His lawyer sat slumped in a chair, exhausted. Every attempt to settle or suppress evidence had failed. The financial records were irrefutable. The hidden camera footage and deleted files were undeniable. The video of his outburst in court had become a symbol of arrogance and downfall. Dean, his lawyer, rubbed his temples. Ethan, they have everything. The surveillance, the texts, even your assistant's testimony. If you take the stand, they'll destroy you. Ethan stopped pacing. His reflection in the dark window looked unfamiliar. I built everything from nothing. They can't take it away because of one mistake. Dean looked up sharply. One mistake? You hit your wife in front of the entire country. You stole company funds and spied on her. This isn't about one mistake. It's about years of abuse. Ethan turned away. His voice dropped to a whisper. You sound just like them. Meanwhile, in the courtroom, Captain Whitman reviewed the final exhibits with the district attorney. Charts of corporate accounts, email transcripts, and photos filled the table. At the front, a projector displayed the company's quarterly reports, showing how millions had vanished under Ethan's name. When Ethan was escorted in, the atmosphere changed. Reporters couldn't enter, but a few journalists waited in the corridor, listening for every detail through closed doors. The judge entered, her tone firm but neutral. This court is now in session for the pre-trial motion of state versus Ethan Grayson. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, we present new evidence establishing a repeated pattern of intimidation and fraud by the defendant. This includes tampering with corporate records and the use of surveillance devices for personal control. Loa Ethan's face twitched. He looked at the papers as if they were written in another language. Dean whispered urgently, Don't react. Stay quiet. But Ethan couldn't help himself. That's a lie, he snapped. Those files were company property. I had every right. The judge raised her hand. Mr. Grayson, you will not speak unless addressed. One more interruption, and I'll remove you from the courtroom. For a moment, silence settled. Then Clara entered. The room shifted again. Even Ethan froze when he saw her. She took the stand, swore the oath, and sat down. Her voice was calm, but carried through the room. I lived with Ethan Grayson for 6 years. I believed he loved me, but over time, he began controlling every part of my life. What I wore, who I called, even when I could leave the house. I thought it was concern. Later, I realized it was control. Dean stood to cross-examine, but Clara's composure never wavered. Every question was met with clarity. Every lie Ethan had built unraveled piece by piece. You're saying your husband was abusive? Dean asked. Clara met his eyes. I'm saying he believed control was love. And when I stopped being silent, he became violent. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of the pen scratching across the clerk's paper. Whitman was called next. He presented the hidden footage and the recovered texts. One of the messages glowed on the projector. If you embarrass me in front of anyone again, I'll make you regret it. The judge read it quietly, then looked up. Mr. Grayson, is this your message? Ethan swallowed hard. I don't remember sending that. Whitman's tone was precise. It was traced directly to your phone, sir. You sent it 2 days before the assault. The air grew heavy. Ethan's breathing quickened. His lawyer whispered for him to remain silent, but he couldn't. She provoked me, Ethan said suddenly, his voice rising. She lied to everyone. You think she's innocent? She made me angry on purpose. The judge's gavel struck the block sharply. Enough. Sit down, Mr. Grayson. Ethan's outburst sealed what little fate remained. The prosecutor didn't even need to say more. The courtroom had witnessed again the same rage that had destroyed his life. Later that afternoon, the hearing ended. The charges officially moved to full trial, and the bail conditions were revoked. Ethan was taken into custody without resistance. This time the officers escorted him through a side door to avoid the reporters waiting outside, but they still caught sight of him through the windows, shoulders slumped, wrists cuffed, his once perfect suit wrinkled. In the hallway, Clara sat quietly while her mother spoke with the district attorney. Wittmann approached and placed a folder on the table beside her. "You won't need to testify again," he said gently. "Your statement today was enough. The rest will be handled by the evidence." Clara nodded. "Thank you, Captain, for everything." He smiled faintly. "You did the hard part. You told the truth." When she left the courthouse, the afternoon light poured down through the glass roof of the atrium. Reporters shouted her name, but she didn't stop. She walked past them through the flash of cameras, through the noise until she reached her mother's car waiting at the curb. Inside the vehicle, Margaret turned to her. "It's over." Clara shook her head softly. "Not yet, but it's beginning to end." That night, every network showed the footage of Ethan's arrest. The man once seen stepping from private jets now walked in silence through a police corridor. The caption on the screen read, "Grayson Empire collapses amid scandal." No. At Grayson Holdings, the board convened an emergency session. They voted unanimously to remove him permanently and to rename the company under new leadership. The giant logo on the skyscraper was dismantled overnight. In her mother's living room, Clara watched the broadcast. She didn't smile or cry. She simply stared as the name Grayson came down piece by piece from the building that had once been his monument to pride. Margaret stood behind her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've reclaimed your life, Clara. That's the only empire that matters now." Clara looked up at her. "He used to say I was nothing without his name. But now he's the one who has no name left." The two women shared a quiet moment of understanding. The television flickered in the background, showing the last remnants of a man's downfall. Outside, the night sky stretched endlessly, free and unbroken. For the first time, Clara didn't feel small beneath it. She felt whole. Spring arrived quietly, as if the city itself was exhaling after a long, dark winter. The courthouse that had once echoed with shouting now sat in calm silence. The headlines that once screamed Clara's name had faded from the front pages, replaced by newer scandals and fresher stories. For her, that silence was not emptiness. It was peace. 3 months had passed since the verdict. Ethan Grayson was serving a 7-year prison sentence for assault, coercive control, and corporate fraud. His empire had collapsed completely. The glass tower that bore his name was now owned by a charity foundation, its lobby renamed the Hill Center for Justice. Clara stood in that very lobby one morning, a soft beam of light falling through the skylight above her. In her arms was her newborn daughter, Emma. The baby slept soundly, her tiny fingers curled around the edge of Clara's blouse. The sound of gentle chatter and footsteps echoed around them as volunteers and visitors moved through the building. Margaret Hill stood beside her, wearing a cream-colored coat instead of her usual judicial black. She looked years younger now, her eyes softer, her shoulders lighter. "It's strange, isn't it?" she said, gazing up at the new sign, seeing his name gone from this place. Clara smiled faintly. "It's not strange. It's right there." The sound of laughter drifted from a nearby conference room. Inside, a small group of women sat around a long table, each of them once a victim of abuse. They were the first participants in a new program Clara had launched, a support network offering legal aid, counseling, and financial education for survivors rebuilding their lives. She adjusted Emma in her arms and turned to her mother. "I didn't think I'd ever walk into a courthouse again," she said quietly. "But now it feels different, like it doesn't belong to him anymore." Margaret touched her daughter's arm gently. "It never did. He only borrowed power that wasn't his to keep." They were interrupted by Captain Wittmann entering the lobby. He carried a folder under his arm and offered a warm smile. "You two look good in this light," he said like justice decided to dress in daylight for once. Margaret chuckled. Captain, I thought you'd be too busy to visit civilians. Whitman shook his head. Not when it's to deliver this. He handed Clara the folder. The final restitution paperwork. The assets the court awarded you from the civil case have been transferred. You're officially free from every tie to his name or his company. Clara opened the folder slowly. Inside were pages stamped with court seals. Each line of text represented another piece of freedom. Bank accounts, property, trusts, all legally hers. She looked up, eyes glistening. It's over then, truly over. No. Whitman nodded. For him? Yes. For you? It's just beginning. They walked outside together into the courtyard. The morning breeze carried the faint scent of blooming magnolia from the park across the street. The city was alive again. Buskers played music on the corners. Children laughed near the fountains. And for the first time, Clara felt part of it instead of apart from it. Margaret excused herself to greet a colleague, leaving Clara and Whitman standing by the steps. For a moment, they both watched the sunlight dance on the courthouse windows. Do you ever think about him? Whitman asked quietly. Clara hesitated. Not in anger, she said. Not anymore. For a long time, I wanted him to feel what I felt. The fear, the shame. But now, I think indifference is the real justice. He doesn't deserve space in my life, not even as a ghost. Whitman nodded thoughtfully. That's the kind of strength no courtroom can teach. She smiled. Maybe it's the kind of strength that comes after you lose everything and realize what actually matters. They stood in silence for a while. Emma stirred in her sleep, making a soft sound, and Clara gently rocked her back to rest. Margaret returned, holding 2 cups of coffee. I hope you're staying long enough for the ceremony, she said to Whitman. He raised an eyebrow. Ceremony? Clara grinned. The official unveiling of the foundation. I didn't want anything grand, just something honest. An hour later, the courtyard filled with people, lawyers, advocates, journalists, and survivors. A small stage had been set up under a canopy of white fabric. Margaret took the microphone first. Her speech was brief, but resonant. This place once represented control, fear, and silence, she said. Now it represents truth, healing, and courage. My daughter reminded me that justice doesn't end when the verdict is read. It begins when people start living freely again. Applause rippled through the crowd. Clara stepped up next, holding Emma close. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. For years, I believed my story was over the moment I became a victim, she began. But I've learned that survival isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. Every scar, every tear, every sleepless night, they aren't signs of weakness. They're proof that I lived through something that was meant to break me, and I'm still here. The crowd listened in complete silence. Even the breeze seemed to pause. I don't tell this story to relive it, she continued. I tell it so that someone else sitting in silence can hear it and know that they are not alone. You can rebuild. You can rise. And the truth, no matter how long it takes, will always find its voice. When she finished, the applause was soft but powerful. Some of the women in the crowd were crying. Others simply stood straighter, holding their heads higher. Margaret joined her on stage and kissed her forehead. You've done more than survive, Clara, she whispered. You've turned your pain into purpose. Later that afternoon, when the crowd had dispersed, Clara sat on a bench in the courtyard. Emma slept peacefully in her stroller. Margaret and Whitman stood nearby, speaking quietly. The sky had shifted to gold, the light catching every edge of the courthouse windows. The symbol that once represented fear now glowed like a monument to endurance. Clara looked down at her daughter and smiled. "You'll never know him," she whispered softly. "You'll only know the world that came after." A few moments later, Margaret called out, "Ready to go home?" Clara nodded. She rose, pushing the stroller toward them. The three of them walked down the path together, the sound of their footsteps steady and sure. As they reached the gate, a reporter nearby asked if she had any final words about the case. Clara turned briefly and said, "Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about truth finally being seen." Then she smiled, small and genuine. And sometimes that truth sets everyone free. The sun dipped lower, bathing the courthouse steps in light. The sound of the city faded behind them. Inside the building, the inscription newly carved into the marble wall read, "Truth is not the end. It is the beginning of freedom." And for Clara Hill, that was exactly what it had become.